I created the trailer to highlight the main visuals and gameplay elements of my game. I will now go more in depth showing what I have changed since the last handing and how I've done it. After taking the feedback I received on board about the lighting and general aesthetic, a lot has changed visually since the last handing. The player and submission feedback highlighted the main issues that I needed to change, develop or take out of the game, as well as the positive features that the players enjoyed. This gave me the foundations to develop my game in the second part. The first priority was texturing and polishing the environment that I already had. With a mixture of 3D Coat and Photoshop, I kept to the hand-painted style as it was a feature that people liked in the feedback. Here are some examples of hand-painted textures on some previous models. I changed the direction of the sun to appear just above the rocks in the background, which meant I could manipulate some point lights to reflect on the water, ultimately giving the illusion of the water shimmering in the sun. I added a lot of light within the coast by using point lights combined with the emissive fire particles to add a flickering effect. When researching into successful 3D side-scroller games such as Little Big Planet and Unravel, it is clear the depth of field plays a big part in making the world seem bigger than it is, also keeping the player's attention on the characters at all time. Using a post-processing box, I used quite a heavy Gaussian blur and an orange tint to give the scene more of a dusk ambience. I think the post-processing effect has given the game a new and more professional look overall. The next issue to tackle was the length of the level. It needed more content and gameplay. I started by sticking to my initial plan and developing a volcano level. I used some assets from the first part, retextured them, and used them to block out the path leading to the volcano entrance. I looked back to my initial design to get some ideas of gameplay. The elements from the design pretty much decided on the aesthetic approach within the volcano. I decided developing a mining-like level could give so many possibilities for mechanics, such as conveyor belts, carts, cogs turning and other relevant attributes. To build the volcano base and entrance, I created a flat plane and used the sculpting tools within Unreal. This meant I could easily change the layout or direction I wanted the level to go in. Here are the assets that I created for inside the volcano. I stuck with the low poly hand-painted art style, as it was a key feature people liked in the feedback. With the assets created, I began putting them together, placing them at different heights and seeing how I could make the level challenging by how it was laid out. I will now show a playthrough of the new scripting elements and explain how and why I've done it. I will now run through the scripting. To create the UMG start screen, I added a new level, placed assets in a little scene which represents the game, and created two buttons. One to open the level of the actual game, and one to close down the game. The playtest feedback stated there was no point in a health system if the player had no enemies. Therefore, I replaced this with a timer. To create the timer, I created a counter integer and added an event tick that every 1 second, 1 would be added to the time, acting like a timer. I used a new widget blueprint and bound the timer number to the time counter value and adding it to the player viewport. To create the cinematic, I used a new camera, set keyframes in a new matinee and added this to the director group. I then linked this to a trigger box just before the player reached the entrance. To create the falling stalactites, I used a matinee linked to all 3 meshes and timed them to fall once one had hit the floor. I slowed them down once they were at the floor level to appear like they were slowly sinking into the lava. I used a trigger box to play the matinee just before the player reached the edge. To create the rotating platform, I animated the platform turning around the belt within Maya, so I knew the animation would look correct in the engine. I created 3 versions of the animation, one slow, medium and fast, as they weren't meeting when I tested it with just one animation speed. As the cogs only had to rotate on an axis, I used a matinee movement track and put this on a loop to give the appearance of turning cogs. To create the conveyor volume, I created a new actor blueprint with a box and arrow component showing me which direction it would be moving in. Then, in the event graph, I used a box trigger with an overlapping actor list for each loop, on an event tick to a world offset pushing it in a direction. To edit the speed, I changed the delta seconds from the event tick, multiplied it with a forward vector and added this to the world offset, which means the speed variable I created can be edited easily at any point. With a conveyor system added, to fit in with the aesthetic and also be an obstacle, I thought some falling rocks could move along the conveyor. To create the spawning rock to fall into the conveyor, I created an actor blueprint class and used my own static mesh. Within the construction graph, I then used a set relative scale and split pins so I could randomise the size of each spawning rock. I then linked some random floating range nodes to set the custom size values. To make the rock spawn, I created a new actor blueprint, added a new custom event to spawn actor from class, which was the previous randomised blueprint. To make sure the rock spawned, I then linked a get actor location to the spawn transform location and a random rotator to the transform rotation. To ensure the rocks didn't clog up the scene, I changed the initial lifespan of spawning rock to 5. The main problem I had was the rocks being unresponsive when they hit the conveyor volume. I later figured out within the size randomising blueprint I had to alter the default route to the static mesh, turn physics and generate overlap on. To create the crushing stamp, I animated it within matinee to drop quickly and rise slowly, giving the player a chance to get through. I then scripted if the player collides with the stamp, the level will restart and the player will be destroyed. To create the monorail cart, I first animated it swaying within Maya. With the pivot point set to the top of the wires, I then imported it to Unreal. To make the cart usable, I had to create a physics asset on the mesh and give it a collision. To get the cart moving, I then used a matinee to move the cart up the hill. The movement combined with the swaying animation makes it look really convincing. The movement is triggered by a trigger box collision when the player is inside the cart. I then put this on a loop so it would be continuous. To add the sound, I used a play sound at location when the player sets off the trigger. I created a cue from the WAV sound clip to loop and modulate the pitch of the clip, making it sound different every time it played. To create the level complete UMG, I added 2 buttons, one to reopen the level and one to shut the game down. This was triggered by an actor blueprint with a static mesh to appear like a platform. When the player overlaps the end tile, the mouse will become visible. It will create the level complete widget whilst removing all other widgets from viewport, as well as stopping the timer. One of the hardest things was managing all the sound clips and effects. I was using trigger boxes and play sound at location, but they were interfering with each other. I then changed the clips to cues and added attenuation radius to each cue, which meant the sounds could blend together nicely. I created particles to add ambience to the game, such as the subtle falling ash, sparks and lava rocks. The falling ash is just a GPU sprite with a transparency material on a slow velocity. The sparks are a bit more complicated with elements of orbit and constant acceleration. I also used GPU sprites to create a more hectic sparkler with added vector fields to bind the sprites before they release on the Z-axis. The most complicated particle I created was the firing mesh data rocks with the smoke trails following. I gave the rocks initial velocity and added -980 to the acceleration, giving them the appearance of gravity. The smoke trails are created from ribbon data spawning and following the mesh. Overall, I'm really happy with the finished game and feel I have learnt valuable skills about producing a game, time management and skills within the software. I think getting player feedback really helped me develop my game and is now something I'm proud to show as my own product. Given more time, I would have liked to incorporate my own character, more enemies and a best time attribute. However, I'm really happy with the overall look of the game. Thank you for watching my video.